Olathe, Kansas, 1982. A town where church steeples dotted the skyline and neighbors knew each other by name. Where faith guided daily life and the worst crime most residents could imagine was a stolen bicycle. February 28th. The silence of night shattered at 4 a.m. by a woman's desperate call to 911. "They killed my husband. Please help me." Police rushed to the modest home on East Sheridan Street. Inside, they discovered a scene that would haunt this religious community for decades. David Harmon, 25, lay motionless in his bed. His skull, crushed by repeated blows. Blood saturated the sheets, splattered across walls. The brutal force of the attack had disfigured his face beyond recognition. His wife, Melinda Harmon, trembled as she told police her story. 2 masked men had broken in demanding keys to the bank where David worked. When he resisted, they beat him to death, then knocked her unconscious. "I woke up and they were gone," she whispered, a bruise forming on her cheek. The community rallied around the young widow. They embraced her at the funeral, prayed with her at church, brought casseroles to ease her grief. But something didn't add up. No forced entry. Nothing stolen. No witnesses who saw anyone flee the scene. And Melinda? She moved away just days after burying her husband. Detectives studied the crime scene photos late into the night. The violence was personal, the lead detective noted. Whoever did this wanted David Harmon dead. For years, the case sat unsolved. The evidence collected filed away, gathering dust as seasons turned into decades. Then in 2001, nearly 20 years later, new technology and fresh eyes reopened the investigation. What they discovered would expose a web of deception so intricate that it had fooled an entire community for generations. The mask worn that February night wasn't fabric. It was something far more convincing. A face David Harmon trusted completely. But what if the real intruder wasn't a stranger at all? If you've ever wondered how well you really know the people closest to you, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more true crime cases. David Harmon was born in Kingsport, Tennessee on July 1, 1961. Friends described him as gentle, kind-hearted, the type of man who would give you his last dollar if you needed it. He was genuine, recalled a childhood friend. What you saw was what you got with David. His parents raised him with strong Christian values that shaped his character. By all accounts, David embraced these teachings wholeheartedly. He attended church every Sunday, participated in Bible study groups, and volunteered whenever needed. At 25, David had already established himself as a respected employee at a local bank in Olathe. Colleagues trusted his judgment and admired his work ethic. He arrived early, stayed late, and treated customers with unfailing courtesy. David was meticulous with details, his supervisor later testified. He took pride in doing things right the first time. But banking wasn't just a job for David, it was a calling. He viewed his position as a way to help others achieve their dreams. First homes, college funds, retirement plans. The responsibility of handling other people's money was something he took seriously. In the summer of 1973, David met Melinda Lambert at a Church of the Nazarene youth camp. She was 16, he was 17. Their connection was immediate. Both raised in devout families, they shared the same values and vision for the future. They wrote letters for years, their relationship blossoming through carefully penned words and occasional visits. In 1977, they married in a ceremony that celebrated their faith as much as their love. David was 20, Melinda just 19. The young couple settled in Olathe, Kansas, where they quickly became fixtures in the local Nazarene congregation. On Sundays, they sat in the third pew from the front, David's arm often draped protectively around Melinda's shoulders. They seemed perfect together, a church member remembered. David looked at Melinda like she hung the moon. Their modest home on East Sheridan Street became a gathering place for friends and fellow church members. David often invited colleagues from the bank, eager to build community in their new hometown. It was at one such gathering that David first met Mark Mangelsdorf, a charismatic student body president at Mid-America Nazarene University, where Melinda worked as a secretary. David was impressed by the young man's ambition and intelligence. "Mark reminds me of myself at that age," David once told a friend, "but with twice the drive." Soon, Mark became a regular visitor at the Harmon home. David welcomed him, blind to the glances exchanged between Mark and his wife when his back was turned. Oblivious to the lingering touches, the private conversations, the growing intimacy. Even when neighbors raised eyebrows at Mark's car parked outside their home late into the evening, David defended the friendship. "He's like family," he'd say with a smile. David Harmon's trusting nature would ultimately cost him everything. Melinda Lambert grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a household where religion wasn't just practiced, it was lived. Her father held a prominent position in the Church of the Nazarene, a denomination known for its conservative values and strict interpretation of Scripture. The rules were clear, a childhood friend of Melinda's later recalled. God first, family second, everything else after that. From an early age, Melinda learned that appearances mattered. Sunday best wasn't just clothing, it was a mindset. A good Nazarene woman was modest, obedient, and above all, loyal to her husband and faith. By the time she married David at 19, Melinda had internalized these expectations. She played her part flawlessly, the devoted wife who kept a tidy home and supported her husband's career. Her smile never wavered at church functions or community gatherings, but behind closed doors, restlessness grew. In 1981, Melinda's father helped secure her a position as secretary at Mid-America Nazarene University in Olathe. The job offered a glimpse into a world beyond her marriage. Young people with dreams, ambitions, possibilities that stretched beyond the confines of East Sheridan Street. "She seemed to come alive at work," a colleague observed. There was a light in her eyes that dimmed when David picked her up at the end of the day. The pressure to maintain a perfect marriage weighed heavily. In their community, divorce wasn't just discouraged, it was considered moral failure. Women who left their husbands faced whispers, exclusion from church activities, and the heavy burden of having broken their covenant before God. "You have to understand," explained a former church member, "becoming a widow was seen as unfortunate. Becoming a divorcee was seen as shameful." Melinda confided in few people about her growing discontent. Her marriage to David provided security and respectability, but something was missing. The passion, the excitement, the feeling of being truly seen. Police reports would later reveal diary entries where Melinda questioned her choices. "Is this all there is?" she wrote in an entry dated September 1981. "A lifetime of Sunday sermons and casserole dinners?" Yet leaving wasn't an option. Not in a community where her father's reputation depended partly on his daughter's exemplary marriage. Not when divorce meant becoming an outcast from the only world she'd ever known. Then Mark Mangelsdorf walked into her office at the university one autumn afternoon in 1981. Tall, confident, ambitious, everything David wasn't. At 23, Mark already had plans that extended far beyond Olathe. Harvard Business School, corporate success, a life defined by achievement rather than faith alone. "When did you know you wanted more?" he asked her during one of their first conversations. It was a question no one had ever thought to ask Melinda Harmon. Mark Mangelsdorf stood out on the Mid-America Nazarene University campus, voted student body president by a landslide, exceptional grades, athletic, popular, a young man clearly destined for success. Mark had this way about him, a fellow student remembered. When he spoke, people listened. Professors predicted he would go far. Classmates admired him. Parents wished their daughters would bring home someone just like him, a young man who embodied the university's values while radiating ambition and charm. At 23, Mark already had his future mapped out. Harvard Business School, a career in marketing, Financial success that would take him far from the modest surroundings of Olathe, Kansas. His introduction to the Harmons came through the university. Melinda, working as a secretary, caught his attention. Their conversation started professionally but quickly turned personal. There was chemistry between them from the beginning, a colleague later testified. Everyone saw it except David. Mark's first visit to the Harmon home came at Melinda's invitation, dinner after a church function. David, impressed by the young man's confidence and faith, welcomed him warmly. Soon, Mark became a regular visitor. He played basketball with David on weekends, discussed business strategies over coffee, attended church services with the couple. To anyone watching, Mark appeared to be a younger brother to David, a mentee seeking guidance. He was always respectful toward David, a neighbor recalled, always called him sir when others were around. But when David worked late at the bank, Mark's visits continued. His car parked outside the Harmon residence raised few eyebrows at first. He was family now, after all. A trusted friend. The phone calls between Mark and Melinda grew longer, more frequent, notes passed at work. Secret meetings justified as university business. A touch that lingered too long, a glance that communicated more than words. By early 1982, their relationship had crossed boundaries. In a community where marital fidelity was sacred, they justified their betrayal as love. Something neither could control nor resist. "We were meant to be together," Mark later told investigators. David was in our way. No one suspected that behind his friendly smile lay the capacity for unthinkable violence. What began as lingering glances evolved quickly into a full-blown affair. By winter 1981, Mark and Melinda were meeting whenever David worked late at the bank. Their relationship intensified in the shadows of a community that would have condemned them both. "They weren't as discreet as they thought," said a university employee who worked with Melinda. "There were whispers around campus, but no one wanted to tell David." The warning signs accumulated. Melinda began dressing differently, paying more attention to her appearance. Phone calls at the Harmon residence would end abruptly when David entered the room. Mark's car, once parked proudly in the driveway during visits, now appeared around the corner or a block away. A neighbor noticed Mark leaving the Harmon home at unusual hours. It was nearly midnight on a Tuesday. She later told police. "David's car wasn't there. I remember thinking it was odd, but I didn't want to assume the worst." At church functions, attentive observers noted how Mark and Melinda avoided each other publicly, a deliberate distance that, in retrospect, spoke volumes. When forced to interact, their conversation appeared stiff, rehearsed, unlike the easy familiarity they had once shown. "It was the overcompensation that gave them away," a church member recalled. "They worked so hard to appear casual that it had the opposite effect." As winter turned to spring, their relationship reached a crossroads. Mark would soon graduate. Mark's future, away from Olathe, beckoned. The future they imagined together required a decision. For Melinda, divorce was unthinkable. In the Church of the Nazarene, marriage was a sacred covenant. Divorce brought shame not only to the individual but to their entire family. Her father's position in the church would be compromised. Friends would be forced to choose sides. She would become an outcast in the only community she had ever known. "In our church, you could be forgiven for almost anything," explained a former member. "But divorce marked you permanently." During late-night conversations in Mark's apartment, a solution emerged. A plan so extreme it crossed the boundary from sin to crime. If Melinda couldn't divorce David, perhaps she could be widowed instead. Investigators would later discover notes exchanged between the lovers detailing possibilities. A car accident, food poisoning, a break-in gone wrong. Each scenario discussed, evaluated, and mostly dismissed as too suspicious or uncertain. In February 1982, they settled on their plan. Mark purchased a crowbar from a hardware store 2 towns over, paying cash to avoid a paper trail. Melinda memorized David's sleep schedule, noting which nights he took medication for occasional insomnia. They chose February 28th, a Sunday night when David would be tired from a full day of church activities, when the neighborhood would be quiet, when no one would question Mark's absence from his apartment. Have you ever noticed warning signs in a relationship that others missed? Share your thoughts and observations in the comments below. Sunday, February 28, 1982. A quiet end to the weekend in Olathe. Most residents were home, preparing for the work week ahead. The Harmon residence on East Sheridan Street appeared dark and peaceful from the outside. Inside, David Harmon lay sleeping. Earlier that day, he had attended morning and evening church services, then worked on bank statements before taking his insomnia medication and going to bed around 10 p.m. Melinda stayed up, allegedly reading in the living room. At approximately 11:45 p.m., she unlocked the back door. Mark Mangelsdorf had purchased the crowbar 2 weeks earlier from a hardware store far enough from Olathe to avoid recognition. He paid cash. Just after midnight, Mark entered through the unlocked door. He moved silently through the house, crowbar in hand, to the master bedroom where David slept. The first blow came without warning. David never woke up to defend himself. Medical examiners would later determine that David suffered at least 10 devastating strikes to his head and face. The attack was methodical, excessive, evidence of determination rather than panic. The force crushed his skull and rendered him unrecognizable. At 4:12 a.m., Melinda called 911. "Please help me," she cried. "Someone broke into our house. They killed my husband." When police arrived, they found Melinda with a bruise forming on her face. She told them a detailed story. 2 masked men had broken in, demanding keys to the bank. When David couldn't immediately provide them, they attacked him in bed. When she screamed, one of them struck her, knocking her unconscious. "When I woke up, they were gone," she explained, her voice steady despite the horror scene just feet away. But detectives noted problems with her account immediately. Nothing was stolen, not even the bank keys the supposed intruders demanded. No signs of forced entry were found. The house hadn't been ransacked. Most tellingly, David's wounds indicated he never woke during the attack. He hadn't struggled or tried to escape. The bedroom showed no signs of confrontation, just the brutal efficiency of a planned execution. Detectives noted in their report, victim appears to have been specifically targeted. This was not a robbery gone wrong. The Olathe Police Department launched their investigation within hours of David's murder. The level of violence immediately told us this wasn't random. Someone wanted David Harmon dead. Investigators questioned neighbors, who reported no unusual vehicles or activity that night, except one elderly woman who mentioned seeing Mark Mangelsdorf's car parked a block away. This detail, combined with Melinda's inconsistent statements, shifted the focus. Why would bank robbers not take anything? How did they enter without forced entry? Why was Melinda's injury so minor compared to the brutality inflicted on David? Within 48 hours, detectives searched Mark's apartment. They found traces of blood on his bathroom sink. A police dog traced a scent from the Harmon house to a dumpster near Mark's residence, where they recovered clothing with microscopic blood spatter. Fingerprint analysis revealed Mark's prints on the Harmon's back door. Not unusual for a frequent visitor, but suspicious given the timing. "We knew who did it," former Detective Michael Rogers stated years later. "We just couldn't prove it conclusively with the technology available then." DNA testing was in its infancy in 1982. Blood typing could place Mark at the scene, but couldn't definitively prove his guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The crowbar was never recovered. Within days of the funeral, Melinda moved back to Ohio. Mark accelerated his graduation and left for Harvard Business School that fall. What investigators didn't anticipate was the influence of Melinda's father, a high-ranking official in the Church of the Nazarene. He reportedly pressed the district attorney's office to cease what he called harassment of his daughter during her time of grief. Church members closed ranks around Melinda, providing character witnesses who couldn't imagine her involvement in such violence. The case wasn't just fighting evidence limitations, admitted a former prosecutor who requested anonymity. It was fighting an entire community's unwillingness to believe one of their own could do this. Without enough physical evidence to secure indictments, the investigation stalled. The file was shelved, reviewed occasionally, but yielding no breakthroughs. For nearly 2 decades, David's killer would walk free. In Ohio, Melinda rebuilt her life with remarkable speed. She enrolled in classes at Ohio State University, found a job at a local insurance company, began attending a new church where nobody knew her past. By 1984, just 2 years after David's murder, she met John Raish, a successful dentist. Their courtship was brief. Within a year, Melinda Lambert Harmon became Melinda Raish. She never spoke about David or Kansas, a neighbor in her Columbus suburb recalled. Most people had no idea she'd been married before. The couple had 2 children. Melinda became active in the PTA, hosted dinner parties, and cultivated the image of a perfect suburban mother. Photos from that period show her smiling, coaching soccer teams, celebrating holidays, all traces of tragedy carefully erased. Meanwhile, Mark Mangelsdorf thrived at Harvard Business School. His professors noted his drive and analytical mind. After graduation, he climbed the corporate ladder rapidly, eventually becoming a marketing executive at a major firm. Marriage, children, a house in an affluent neighborhood. Mark achieved everything he planned. Former classmates described him as focused, successful, and seemingly unburdened by his past. For both Melinda and Mark, life moved forward. New identities, new relationships, new communities that knew nothing of a bloody bedroom in Kansas. Back in Olathe, David Harmon's case file gathered dust. His parents visited his grave on birthdays and holidays, still asking the same question: who killed their son? The answer was building a career in New York and raising children in Ohio. Living in plain sight, believing they had escaped justice forever. If this case is shocking you as much as it shocked us, hit that like button and subscribe for more true crime stories with unexpected twists. Nearly 2 decades after David Harmon's murder, detectives who handled the case had retired. The crowbar remained missing. But something had changed. Forensic science. DNA technology in 2001 was light years beyond what we had in 1982, explained Bob Steffen, the lead cold case investigator assigned to re-examine the evidence. We could now detect what was previously invisible. The original blood samples from Mark's apartment, preserved in the evidence locker, underwent advanced testing. Modern techniques revealed DNA patterns consistent with David Harmon's blood profile. The clothing recovered from the dumpster near Mark's residence showed microscopic splatter patterns typical of a close-range blunt force attack. With new evidence in hand, investigators traveled to Columbus, Ohio, where Melinda Raish had built her new life. The soccer mom who volunteered at school functions was now their prime suspect. "Mrs. Raish, we'd like to ask you some questions about your late husband," Detective Carol Smith said when Melinda opened her front door on a sunny April morning. In a recorded interview room, Melinda's story began to shift. No longer were there 2 masked intruders, now just one. Details she had previously described with certainty became fuzzy. When pressed about inconsistencies, Melinda claimed trauma had affected her memory. "I'm not sure anymore," she admitted, her composed facade cracking. It was a long time ago. Most damning was her response when asked about her relationship with Mark Mangelsdorf. "We were just friends," she insisted initially. Then, hours into questioning, "We might have been emotionally closer than appropriate." Meanwhile, investigators tracked Mark to his executive position in New York. Surveillance photos showed a confident man in tailored suits, seemingly untouchable in his success. Former classmates and colleagues were interviewed. Several recalled Mark's sudden departure from Kansas after David's murder. One remembered a disturbing comment Mark had made while intoxicated at a college party. Sometimes obstacles need to be removed. The forensic evidence, combined with the shifting statements, painted a clear picture. What had been circumstantial in 1982 was now approaching certainty. In November 2001, the prosecutor's office prepared arrest warrants. Justice, delayed for nearly 20 years, was finally closing in. On a crisp morning in February 2003, police officers surrounded Melinda Raish's suburban Columbus home. Neighbors watched in disbelief as the PTA mom and soccer coach was led away in handcuffs, charged with first-degree murder. She didn't even look surprised, one officer noted. It was like she'd been waiting for this day to come. Mark Mangelsdorf's arrest came 2 years later, in March 2005. The marketing executive was taken into custody at his office in New York. The man who had climbed so high in the corporate world now faced life imprisonment for a crime committed decades earlier. Initially, both Melinda and Mark maintained their innocence. Their attorneys filed motions to suppress evidence, arguing the case was too old, the memories too faded for reliable prosecution. Then the prosecution revealed their hand. DNA evidence linking Mark to the crime scene, inconsistencies in Melinda's statements, and most damaging, love letters exchanged between the two that established motive. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Melinda broke first. In a tear-filled confession, she admitted to planning David's murder with Mark. She described unlocking the door, knowing what would happen when Mark entered. She confirmed their affair and their plan to be together once David was gone. "I never thought he would hit him so many times," she sobbed during her recorded confession. In exchange for her testimony against Mark, prosecutors offered Melinda a reduced charge of second-degree murder. In April 2005, she pleaded guilty and received a sentence of 10 to 20 years. Mark, confronted with Melinda's confession and the physical evidence, accepted a similar plea deal in 2006. In a courtroom filled with David's family, he admitted to wielding the crowbar that took David's life. The judge's words were cutting. "You betrayed a friend who trusted you, took his life, and then lived as if nothing happened for 20 years. The Olathe community reeled from the confirmation of what many had suspected but couldn't prove. The Church of the Nazarene held a memorial service for David, acknowledging the painful truth that 2 of their own had committed this terrible act. Melinda served 9 years before being released in 2015. Mark was released after serving 10 years. Both remain on parole, living quiet lives far from Kansas and each other. For David's parents, who attended every court hearing, justice came too late but brought some measure of peace. "At least now we know the truth," his father told reporters after the sentencing. "At least now we know." The murder of David Harmon offers painful lessons about trust, perception, and justice. Looking back, the warning signs were there. Hidden in plain sight, Mark's frequent visits while David was away, Melinda's sudden change in appearance and behavior, the whispers among colleagues and neighbors that went unaddressed. A community saw the pieces, but never assembled the puzzle. "We noticed things that seemed off," admitted a former neighbor. But who wants to accuse a church member of having an affair, let alone planning murder? Perhaps the most tragic element was how religious and societal pressures created the perfect storm. In a community where divorce was considered spiritual failure, Melinda saw murder as the more acceptable option. The stigma that would have followed a separation pushed her toward an unthinkable alternative. The case highlights the critical importance of addressing relationship issues openly. Communities that create safe spaces for struggling marriages might prevent desperate actions born from feeling trapped. For investigators, David Harmon's murder underscores the value of persistence. Cases that seem unsolvable can break open with technological advancements and fresh perspectives. Today, the modest house on East Sheridan Street stands as a silent reminder. New families have moved in, unaware of the betrayal that once unfolded within those walls. But in police academies and forensic classrooms, David's case continues to teach valuable lessons about evidence preservation, cold case investigation, and the patience required for justice. What do you think is the most important lesson from this tragic case? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories that offer valuable insights. 4 decades after David Harmon's murder, the ripple effects continue. A family lost their son. A community lost its sense of security. A church confronted the darkest aspects of human nature within its own congregation. What makes this case particularly haunting isn't just the brutality of the crime, but the betrayal at its core. The people David trusted most, his wife and his friend, conspired to end his life for their own desires. Justice came late but arrived nonetheless, proving that time doesn't erase the truth. Some secrets refuse to stay buried, no matter how perfect the facade constructed to hide them. In the end, David Harmon's legacy isn't how he died, but how his case reminds us that justice, though delayed, is rarely denied.